Letters of Oscar Wilde, Volume 1, 1868 to 1890. To Lady Jane Wilde, 8th of September, 1868. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rob Marland. Lot 188. Livy. Titi Livii Patavini, Historiae Romanae, Libri 21 to 35, with notes by John Walker. Octavo, full blue Levant Morocco, Jansen style, gilt edges. Dublin, 1862. Oscar Wilde's school book, with his autograph on title dated November 1868, together with numerous marginal notes and comments. Inserted is a 4-page, octavo, autograph letter signed, dated Portora School, September 8, 1868, to his mother. This letter contains a pen and ink drawing picturing their delight on receiving the hamper. Darling Mamma, the hamper came today. I never got such a jolly surprise. Many thanks for it. It was more than kind of you to think of it. You never told me anything about the publisher in Glasgow. What does he say? And have you written to Aunt Warren on the green note paper? This is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, of Wilde's letters extant. End of section. To Sir William Wilde and Lady Jane Wilde, circa 1875, from the Catalogue of the Dulao Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 40. 5 important autograph letters, in Wilde's hand throughout, written about 1875 when he was touring in Italy. Accompanying the letters are 4 pages of original sketches by Wilde, illustrating the things he saw. There is also an envelope in the handwriting of his father. Oscar, letters from Milan, Padua, Venice, Verona, 1875. The original envelopes to Sir W. R. Wills Wilde and to Lady Wilde are also preserved. £200. 1. Addressed to his father. Tuesday. Went in the morning to see San Lorenzo, built in the usual Florentine way, cruciform. A long hall supported by Grecian pillars, a gorgeous dome in the centre, and 3 aisles leading off it. There follows a detailed description of the Medici chapels, of various granite and porphyry sarcophagi, mentioning Michelangelo's statues of night and morning, etc. Then to the Biblioteca Lawrenziana, where I was shown wonderfully illuminated missals and unreadable manuscripts and decorations. I remarked the extreme clearness of the initial letters in the Italian missals and Bibles, so different from those in the Book of Kells, etc., which might stand for anything. The early illuminations are very beautiful in design and sentiment. Then to the Etruscan Museum, which is in the suppressed monastery of San Onofrico, and most interesting. A detailed description of the entrance and the interior of the museum then follows. In the evening we dined at a restaurant on top of San Miniato. Coming back I met just outside the Pitti Palace a wonderful funeral, a long procession of monks bearing torches, all in white and wearing a long linen veil over their faces. They bore 2 coffins, and looked like those awful monks you see in pictures of the Inquisition. Mahaffy is not come yet. Footnote. J. P. Mahaffy, with whom Wilde was at school. End footnote. The letter ends with a mention of the fêtes on the anniversary of Michelangelo's birthday, and a reference to local affairs at home. It is signed, Oscar O. F. W. Wilde. and there is a small sketch at the side of the signature. 4 pages, 8vo. 2. This letter begins at page 2 with a description of some Etruscan statues. There are also wonderful sarcophagi, which I have roughly drawn for you. At the top a figure of the dead man or woman holding a plate containing the obol for paying the ferryman over Styx. Also extraordinary jars with heads and arms. Funeral, of course. I have drawn them. Further and more elaborate description of the 150 sarcophagi follows, but the letter is not signed. 2 pages, 8vo. 4 pages, 8vo of drawings. See illustration number 9, page 83. 3. The envelope of this letter, addressed to his mother, is preserved. From Milan. It is mostly cast in the form of a diary. Left Florence with much regret on Saturday night, passed through the Apennines, beautiful alpine scenery, train runs on side of mountains. Halfway up, there follows a description of the mountain scenery and of Italian scenery generally. Within 4 miles of Venice, a complete change, a bleak bog, exactly like Bog of Allen, only flatter. Crossed over a big lagoon on a bridge, and arrived at Venice 7:30. Seized on immediately by gondoliers, and embarked with our luggage into a black, hearse-like barge, such as King Arthur was taken away in after the fatal battle. Finally, through long, narrow canals, we arrived at our hotel, which was in the great Piazza San Marco, the only place in Venice except the Rialto anyone walks in. Plan of it. An elaborate plan is drawn, showing the position of the hotel. The church of San Marco is most gorgeous, a splendid Byzantine church, covered with gilding and mosaics inside and out. Splendid gates of bronze, everything glorious. Next to it is the Doge's palace, which is beyond praise. Inside, giant council chambers, the walls painted with frescoes by Titian of the great battles of the Venetians. The ceiling crossed by gilded beams and rich engilded carvings. Rooms fit for the noble-looking grave senators whose pictures are on the walls by Titian or Tintoretto. Beneath all this greatness are the most dismal dungeons and torture rooms, most terrible. Visited some of the islands off Venice. On one, an Armenian monastery where Byron used to live. Went to another, San Lido, a favourite place on Sunday, and had oysters and shrimps. Returned home in the flood of a great sunset. Venice is a city just risen from the sea, a long line of crowded churches and palaces, everywhere white or gilded domes and tall campaniles, no opening in the whole city except at the Piazza San Marco, a great pink sunset with a long line of purple thunderclouds behind the city. After dinner, went to the theatre and saw a good circus. Luckily, a wonderful moon. We landed from our gondola at the Lion of St. Mark. The scene was so romantic that it seemed to be an artistic scene from an opera. We sat on the base of the pillar, on one side of us the Doge's palace, on the other the King's palace. Behind us the campanile, the water steps crowded with black gondolas, and a great flood of light coming right up to us across the water. Every moment a black, silent gondola would glide across this great stream of light and be lost in the darkness. This letter is not signed. 2 pages, 8vo. 4. From Milan. I believe you left me last looking at the moon from the Piazza San Marco. With difficulty we tore ourselves away to the hotel. There follows a description of a trip on the Grand Canal in a gondola. Stopped to see the picture gallery, which, as usual, was in a suppressed monastery. Titian and Tintoretto in great force. Titian's Assumption, certainly the best picture in Italy. Went to a lot of churches, all, however, in extravagant Baroque style, very much in worked metal and polished marble and mosaic, but as a rule inartistic. There are two great pictures, one a beautiful Madonna by Bellini, the other a picture of Dives and Lazarus by Bonfazio, containing the only lovely woman's face I have seen in Italy. Mentions a visit to a concert, and criticizes the dress fashions. After marriage, the Italian women degenerate awfully, but the boys and girls are beautiful. Amongst married women, the general types are Titians, and an ugly, sallow likeness of Bettini. Venice, in beauty of architecture and colour, is beyond description. It is the meeting place of the Byzantine and Italian art, belonging to the East as much as to the West. The cathedral, outside most elaborate in pinnacles and statues awfully out of proportion with the rest of the building, inside most impressive through its huge size and giant pillars supporting the roof. Some good old stained glass, and a lot of hideous modern windows. These moderns don't see that the use of a window in a church is to show a beautiful massing together and blending of colour. A good old window has the rich pattern of a Turkey carpet. The figures are quite subordinate and only serve to show the sentiment of the designer. A modern fresco style of window has sua natura to compete with painting, and, of course, looks monstrous and theatrical. The cathedral is an awful failure. Outside, the design is monstrous and inartistic. The over-elaborated details stuck high up where no one can see them. Everything is vile in it. It is, however, imposing and gigantic as a failure. Mentions a visit to the baptistery at Padua and the great frescoes of Giotto. Describes the beautiful ceiling. Of the beauty and purity of sentiment, the clear transparent colour, bright as the day it was painted on, the harmony of the whole building, I am unable to tell you. He is the first of all painters. Padua is a quaint town with good colonnades along each street, a university like a barracks, one charming church, San Anastasi, and a lot of bad ones, and the best restaurant in Italy. Mentions witnessing a performance of Hamlet in Verona. Mentions the marketplace. Filled with the most gigantic umbrellas I ever saw, like young palm trees, under which sat fruit sellers. Visits the Ambrosian Library. Mentions the fine manuscripts and palimpsests, and a Bible with Irish glosses of the 6th or 7th century. Prefers Raphael's drawings to his pictures, and mentions some Holbeins and Dürers, also Correggios and Periginos. The gem of the whole collection is a lovely Madonna by Bernardino, standing among a lot of trellised roses that Morris and Rossetti would love. Another by him we saw in the library with a background of lilies. Milan is a second Paris, all the town white stone and gilding. Had some good wine of Asti, like good cider or sweet champagne. In the evening went to see a new opera, Dolores, by a young maestro called Orbere. A good imitation of Bellini in some parts, some pretty rondos, but its general character was inharmonious shouting. However, the frantic enthusiasm of the people knew no bounds. Every 5 minutes a terrible furore, yelling of bravas, from every part of the house, followed by a frantic rush of all the actors for the composer, who was posted at the side scenes, ready to rush out on the slightest symptom of approval. A weak-looking creature, who placed his grimy hand on a shady-looking shirt to show his emotion, fell on the prima donna's neck in ecstasy, and blew kisses to us all. He came out no less than 19 times, and finally 3 crowns were brought out, one of which, a great laurel one with green ribbons, was clapped on his head, and as his head was so very narrow, it rested partly on a very large angular nose, and partly on his grimy shirt-collar. A thumbnail sketch of the composer is included in the letter. The letter goes on to say that his companions will continue their journey, but, as he had no money, he was obliged to leave them. The letter is signed Oscar. 8 pages, 8vo. 5. A short note stating that he will be in Paris on Monday and has £2, and has had only 1 letter from his mother and 1 from his father since he left, but supposes there are some in Florence. If there is no money at Paris for me, I will not know what to do, but I feel sure there will be the genial £5. The letter is signed, Yours ever, Oscar O.F. Wilde. End of section. To Lady Jane Wilde, from The Catalogue of the Dallow Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 48. Fragment of the draft of a letter, probably written to Lady Wilde from Italy, with several marginal sketches, including an attempt at a self-portrait. 2 pages, 8vo. £5, 5s. The letter describes an Italian island. What strikes one is extreme age, and the twisted, broken, writing in pain, and such as Gustave Doré and loved to draw. End of section. To the editor of Routledge's Christmas Annual. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Pages 66 to 68. Sen Artisti, or The Artist's Dream, by Madame Helena Modjeska, translated from the Polish by Oscar Wilde. Reprinted in Poems, 1908, pages 281 to 285. The poem contains about 100 lines of blank verse, beginning, I too have had my dreams, I, known indeed the crowded visions of a fiery youth, which haunt me still. Writing from Keats' house, Tite Street, Chelsea, to the editor, Wilde said, Whatever beauty is in the poem is due to the graceful fancy and passionate artistic nature of Madame Modjeska. He himself being really only the reed through which her sweet notes have been blown. The whole letter was printed by Mrs. Clement Scott in The Freelance, February 17th, 1906. End of section. To Herman Vezin, 4th of October 1880. From The Real Oscar Wilde by Robert Sherard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tite Street, Chelsea. My dear Vezin, I send you a copy of my drama. Footnote. A copy of the first edition of Vera. End footnote. Which you were kind enough to hear me read some months ago. Any suggestion about situations or dialogue I should be so glad to get from such an experienced artist as yourself. I have just found out what a difficult craft playwriting is. Will you let me tell you what immense pleasure your Iago gave me? It seems to me the most perfect example I have seen of that right realism which is founded on consummate art and sustained by consummate genius. The man, Iago, walked and talked before us. 2 points particularly delighted me. The enormous character you gave to otherwise trivial details. A rare and splendid art to make all common things symbolic of the leading idea, as Albert Dürer loved to do in his drawings. The other is your delivery of asides, notably in Act 2. I never knew how they ought to be quite before. But perhaps you are saying in an aside now, Ona jam satis. So believe me, your friend and admirer, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To Oscar Browning. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. An interesting letter from Wilde, asking Mr. Oscar Browning to review his poems, has recently passed into the possession of Messrs. Robson and Company of Coventry Street, Piccadilly, who have allowed it to be printed here. Keats House, Tite Street, Chelsea. My dear Browning, if you get the opportunity, and would care for it, I wish you would review my first volume of poems, just about to appear. Books so often fall into stupid and illiterate hands that I am anxious to be really criticized. Ignorant praise or ignorant blame is so insulting. Truly yours, Oscar Wilde. Keats House was not number 16, where Wilde lived from the time of his marriage in 1884 to his arrest in 1895, but number 3 Tite Street, where he shared rooms with Frank Miles, the painter. End of section. To Robert Browning. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Keats House, Tite Street, Chelsea. Dear Mr. Browning, will you accept from me the first copy of my poems, the only tribute I can offer you for the delight and the wonder which the strength and splendor of your work has given me from my boyhood. Believe me, in all affectionate admiration, very truly yours, Oscar Wilde. End of section. Exchange with an unidentified correspondent. 30th of September to the 1st of October 1881. From The Works of Oscar Wilde, Volume 15, American Lectures by W. F. Morse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. New York, September 30th, 81. Oscar Wilde, 1 Ovington Square, London. Responsible agent asks me to inquire if you will consider offer he makes by letter for 50 readings, beginning November 1st. This is confidential. Answer. The reply came promptly. London, October 1st, 1881. Wilde. Yes, if offer good. Chelsea, Tite Street. End of section. To the Editor of The Sun, Baltimore, Maryland, 23rd of January, 1882. From The Baltimore Sun, 24th of January, 1882. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Complimentary and explanatory. Messrs. A. S. Abel and Company. Dear Sirs, America should be a country without prejudice, so I will pray you to permit me to say that my failing to visit your city was due entirely and absolutely to some misunderstanding on the part of a messenger from my manager's office, who met me at Philadelphia with instructions to proceed direct to Washington, and not stop at Baltimore, as I had hoped to do. Since my arrival in America, I have received in each city that courtesy for which your country is famous, and I would not wish it to be thought that I could be willingly capable of any such unpardonable rudeness as your papers would seem seriously to charge me with. I remain your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Washington, D.C., January 23rd, 1882. End of section. To Mrs. Julian Hawthorne, 12th of February, 1882. From The Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 312. Autograph letter signed. 2 pages on card. Chicago, February 12, 1882. To Mrs. Julian Hawthorne, with addressed envelope. Your letter has been following me from city to city. You should have asked me when I was at Boston. But now I am many 100 miles off, in Chicago. I must come in April. May I come then? End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse. From The Works of Oscar Wilde, Volume 15, American Lectures by W. F. Morse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. From Chicago, Mr. Wilde wrote, I hope you will arrange some more matinees. To lecture in the day does not tire me. I would sooner lecture 5 or 6 times a week, and travel, say 3 or 4 hours a day, than lecture 3 times and travel 10 hours. I do not think I should ever lecture less than 4 times, and these matinees are a great hit. Let me know what we are to do after Cincinnati. Is it Canada? I am ready to lecture till last week in April. April 15th, say. End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, from The Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 351. Autograph letter signed. 5 pages, quarto, Cincinnati, no date. To Mr. Stoddart, referring to Rose Leaf and Apple Leaf. I send you the volume of poems and the preface. The preface, you will see, is most important, signifying my new departure from Mr. Ruskin and the Pre-Raphaelites, and marks an era in the aesthetic movement, etc. End of section. To Joaquin Miller, from The Works of Oscar Wilde, Volume 15, American Lectures, by W. F. Morse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mr. Joaquin Miller wrote a letter in February of 1882 to Oscar Wilde, denouncing the Philistine press of certain towns for its abuse of Wilde. Wilde wrote this reply to Miller. My dear Joaquin Miller, I thank you for your chivalrous and courteous letter to me, published in The World. Believe me, I would as lief judge of the strength and splendor of the sun and sea by the dusk that dances in the beam, and the bubble that breaks on the wave, as take the petty and profitless vulgarity of 1 or 2 insignificant towns as any test or standard of the real spirit of a sane, strong, and simple people, or allow it to affect my respect for the many noble men or women whom it has been my privilege in this great country to know. For myself, and the cause which I represent, I have no fear as regards the future. Slander and folly have their way for a season, but for a season only. While, as touching either the few provincial newspapers which have so vainly assailed me, or that ignorant and itinerant libeller of New England, lecturing from village to village in such open and ostentatious isolation, Be sure I have no time to waste on them. Youth being so glorious, art so godlike, and the very world about us so full of beautiful things, and things worthy of reverence, and things honourable, how should one stop to listen to the lucubrations of a literary gamin, to the brawling and mouthing of a man whose praise would be as insolent as his slander is impotent, or to the irresponsible and irrepressible chatter of the professionally unproductive? 'Tis a great advantage, I admit, to have done nothing, but one must not abuse even that advantage. Who, after all, that I should write of him, is this scribbling anonymuncule in grand old Massachusetts, who scrawls and screams so glibly at what he cannot understand? This apostle of inhospitality, who delights to defile, to desecrate, and to defame the gracious courtesies he is unworthy to enjoy. Who are these scribes, who, passing with purposeless alacrity from the police news to the Parthenon, and from crime to criticism, sway with such serene incapacity the office which they so lately swept? Narcissuses of imbecility! What should they see in the clear waters of beauty, and in the well undefiled of truth, but the shifting and shadowy image of their own substantial stupidity? Secure of that oblivion for which they toil so laboriously, and, I must acknowledge, with such success, let them peer at us through their telescopes, and report what they like of us. But, my dear Joachim, should we put them under the microscope, there would be really nothing to be seen. I look forward to passing another delightful evening with you on my return to New York, and I need not tell you that whenever you visit England, you will be received with that courtesy with which it is our pleasure always to welcome all Americans, and that honor with which it is our privilege to greet all poets. Most sincerely and affectionately yours, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 357. Autograph letter signed. 8 pages. Octavo. No place nor date. To J. M. Stoddart. Preserved in a crimson Levant Morocco case, linings of cream moire silk. I send you an extract from a letter of Swinburne which I have just received from him about our grand Walt. You might care to publish it. I am sincerely interested and gratified by your account of Walt Whitman, and the assurance of his kindly and friendly feeling towards me, and I thank you no less sincerely for your kindness in sending me word of it. Assure him that I have by no manner of means relaxed my admiration of his noblest works, etc. End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse, March 1882, from The Works of Oscar Wilde, Volume 15, American Lectures by W. F. Morse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. During the month of March, Mr. Wilde wrote me, "Kindly see that I am not advertised to lecture on the English Renaissance. I have not delivered that lecture since February 11th, and yet I'm always advertised for it. It is very annoying. And, besides, the English Renaissance is printed in the seaside, so people think they know it, and stay away. The lecture is on the decorative arts." End of section. To Richard Doyley Cart, 16th of March, 1882. From the catalogue of the Gleinzer collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 115. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Mr. D'Oyly Carte, manager of his American tour. 6 pages, numbered, octavo, on the stationery of the Metropolitan Hotel. Signed in full. St. Paul, Minnesota, March 16, 1882. I have received your letter about the play. I agree to place it entirely in your hands for a production on the terms of my receiving half profits, and a guarantee of £200 paid down to me on occasion of its production. As regards the cast, I am sure you see yourself how well the part will suit Clara Morris. I am, however, quite aware how difficile she is, and what practical danger may attend the perilling of it on her. If Miss Morris cannot be really retained, I am willing to leave it to your hands for Rose Coghlan. Unusually interesting letter with reference to Vera, which was refused by both actresses mentioned. Dated letters of this period are especially rare. End of section. To Richard D'Oyly Carte, from the Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dear Mr. Carte, I send you the prologue. If it is too long, cut it. I have introduced Prince Paul Marilovsky in it as a simple colonel. This will give a dramatic point to his meeting Vera among the Nihilists in the 3rd act, where I will introduce a little speech about it. I will give Vera a few sentences about her brother being sent to Siberia to show the connection of the prologue. This will be a matter of a few minutes only, when I get to New York. The 1st act, where at present stands Tomb of the Kings at Moscow, has too operatic a title. It is to be called 99 Rue Tchernovaya, Moscow, and the conspirators are to be modern, and the room a bare garret, painted crimson. It is to be realistic, not operatic conspiracy. I am sure you will agree with me in that. Let me hear soon about it. Truly yours, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To Richard D'Oyly Carte, circa April 1882. From the Catalogue of the Gleinzer collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 117. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Mr. D'Oyly Carte. 4 pages, large quarto, 10½ by 8 inches, on private paper, watermarked Belfast linen. Signed in full. Western States, circa April 1882. As regards any changes in the play, pray rest assured that any suggestions I will be only too glad to get. The play is meant not to be read, but to be acted, and the actor has always a right to object and to suggest. No one could recognize the artist's right more than I do. The only reason to speak honestly that the play is as good an acting play as it is that I took every actor's suggestion I could get. I feel that it will succeed if she, Clara Morris, act, and you manage. Could you secure Keel Bellew or Johnston Forbes Robertson for the Tsarevich? Very interesting letter with reference to Vera, especially remarkable for his views concerning the rights of the actor, wholly at variance with those advertised in Puppets and Actors, 1892. End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse, circa 21st of March, 1882. Version 1. From the Catalogue of the Gleinzer collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 116. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Colonel W. F. Morse. 10 pages, numbered. Octavo, on the stationery of the Withnell House. Signed in full. Omaha, Nebraska, circa March 21st, 1882. 6 lectures a week for 3 weeks seem to me enormous. I do not know if I can stand it. However, I will do my best, and if I feel Titan-like, will do matinees. I did not revive any discussion on the Baltimore business at Chicago for many reasons, but the Chicago papers were particularly hostile at the time, accusing me of encouraging the attack on me, and of having corrected the proofs of the Washington attack, and approved of the caricature before it was published. If Mr. Cart wishes a public discussion of why I went to Washington instead of Baltimore, I think he is very foolish. Mr. Cart should have, at the time I was being so brutally assailed, written to say that the mistake arose through a careless messenger from the office. It is intolerable to bore me about the idiocy of the office clerk. As regards my opinion of the management, that would be premature. I send you the play prologue. I am very tired and worn out. Thank you for sending Lady Wilde the cheque. I will lecture as long as the public stands being lectured. To the middle of May, certainly. Very long, interesting letter, dealing in detail with his quarrel with Archibald Forbes, the Baltimore incident, and the monkey cartoon in the Washington Post, January 22nd, 1882. End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse, version 2. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 338. Autograph letter signed, 10 pages, octavo, Omaha, Nebraska, 1882, to Colonel Morse, regarding his lecture tour and the accusations against him of encouraging an attack on himself for newspaper notoriety. 6 lectures a week for 3 weeks seems to me enormous. I do not know if I can stand it. However, I will do my best, and if I feel Titan-like, will do matinees, but I do not think that possible. I will lecture as long as the public stands being lectured, to middle of May, certainly, or the end of it. End of section. Rennell Rod to Oscar Wilde. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter from the author of Rose Leaf and Apple Leaf to Oscar Wilde. Lot 394. Rod, Sir Rennell. Autograph letter signed, Rennell, 2 pages, quarto, Sunday 2nd, to Oscar Wilde. How good of you to get my poems published. I am much excited about it. I wonder if you have written much. I have not seen Burne-Jones for a long time. How splendid to be in California. When you return you must read my school prize poem on California, which is remarkable for that exact description only to be found in the writings of those who have never seen what they describe. End of section. To Mrs. Bernard Beer. From Oscar Wilde, Fragments and Memories by Martin Birnbaum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your letter was charming. Write to New York, 1207 Broadway. Kansas City, Missouri. My dear Bernie, I have lectured to the Mormons. The Opera House at Salt Lake is an enormous affair about the size of Covent Garden, and holds with ease 14 families. They sit like this. A line drawing of 2 men seated between groups of women, each group labelled his wife. And very, very ugly. The president, a nice old man, sat with 5 wives in the stage box. I visited him in the afternoon and saw a charming daughter of his. I have also lectured at Leadville, the great mining city in the Rocky Mountains. We took a whole day to get up to it on a narrow-gauge railway 14,000 feet in height. My audience was entirely miners. Their make-up excellent, red shirts and blonde beards, the whole of the first 3 rows being filled with McKee Rankins of every colour and dimension. I spoke to them of the early Florentines, and they slept as though no crime had ever stained the ravines of their mountain home. I described to them the picture of Botticelli, and the name, which seemed to them like a new drink, roused them from their dreams. But when I told them in my boyish eloquence of the secret of Botticelli, the strong men wept like children. Their sympathy touched me, and I approached modern art, and had almost won them over to a real reverence for what is beautiful, when, unluckily, I described one of Jimmy Whistler's Nocturnes in Blue and Gold. Then they leaped to their feet, and in their grand, simple way swore that such things should not be. Some of the younger ones pulled their revolvers out and left hurriedly to see if Jimmy was prowling about the saloons, or wrestling a hash at any eating shop. Had he been there, I fear he would have been killed, their feeling was so bitter. Their enthusiasm satisfied me, and I ended my lecture there. Then I found the governor of the state waiting in a bullock wagon to bring me down the great silver mine of the world, the Matchless. So off we drove, the miners carrying torches before us, till we came to the shaft and were shot down in buckets. I, of course, true to my principle, being graceful even in a bucket. And down into the great gallery of the mine, the walls and ceilings glittering with metal ore, was spread a banquet for us. The amazement of the miners when they saw that art and appetite could go hand in hand knew no bounds. When I lit a long cigar they cheered till the silver fell in dust from the roof on our plates, and when I quaffed a cocktail without flinching, they unanimously pronounced me, in their grand, simple way, a bully boy with no glass eye. Artless and spontaneous praise which touched me more than the pompous panegyrics of literary critics ever did or could. Then I had to open a new vein, or lode, which with a silver drill I brilliantly performed amidst unanimous applause. The silver drill was presented to me, and the lode named the Oscar. I had hoped that in their simple, grand way they would have offered me shares in the Oscar, but in their artless, untutored fashion they did not. Only the silver drill remains as a memory of my night at Leadville. I have had a delightful time all through California and Colorado, and am now returning home, twice as affected as ever, my dear Bernie. Please remember me to dear Dot, to Reggie and all our mutual friends, including Monty Morris, who won't write to me or ever criticize me. Goodbye, your sincere friend, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, 17th of April, 1882, from The Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 355. Autograph letter signed. 1 page, quarto, Kansas City, April 17th, 1882. To J. M. Stoddart. I send you the proof. There are a good many corrections, so perhaps I'd better have another to see that it is all right. Where is Whitman? In Camden Town? End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 352. Autograph letter signed. 3 pages, quarto. Chicago, no date. To J. M. Stoddart. In regards, Rose Leaf and Apple Leaf. I enclose final proof. I call it now l'envoi and not envoi. Please see that the headings are right. I wish you could insert the Sea King's grave before Tiber mouth. It comes in well there, but it is not much importance. End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, May 1882. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 354. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, quarto. Columbus, Ohio, May 1882. To J. M. Stoddart. Blank pages of themselves, being non-beautiful, could not add anything to the charm of the book. They must be ornamented. You might have one page of roses and the other of apple blossoms, and call the book Rose Leaf and Apple Leaf, or Narcissus and Daffodil, using those flowers. A transcription in indelible pencil has been made under each word to facilitate reading at the printing office of J. M. Stoddart. End of section. To J. M. Stoddart, May 1882. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 353. Autograph letter signed. 1 page, quarto. Undated, May 1882. To J. M. Stoddart. My young singer never wearies of singing. Here are 2 more poems, quite beautiful. End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse, circa September 1882. Version 1. From the Catalogue of the Gleinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Important letter regarding Wilde's first play, Vera. Lot 118. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Colonel W. F. Morse. 6 pages, octavo, on private notepaper, watermarked Russian linen. Signed in full. Boston, circa September 1882. Mr. Moore paid only $250 and no expenses at all. I did not like to stop lecturing, as he entreated me to go on. I thought it would be best then that our side of the contract should be perfectly carried out. I think our chance is to give the 2 weeks at $700 a week. He will do this in the large towns, but he brought me to wretched villages of 10,000 people, where of course they did not come. Hayman from Australia has not arrived yet. If Mary Anderson takes my play, I could not go. Thank you for sending the play to Washington. I think to copyright under your name would be a very good plan. I wish you would send one to the manager you spoke of here, Mr. Field. Also one to Rose Coghlan at Wallack's, and one to Wallack himself. I wish you would tell Hayman, etc., etc. Very interesting and legible letter, referring to the trials of the lecturer, his projected tour in the Far East, and the fortunes of Vera. At the bottom of page 6, the names of the recipients of copies of Vera have been jotted down in pencil, with the following note, initialed by Colonel Morse. This memo is for copies of Wilde's play Vera, which was copyrighted by me and sent out as directed by Wilde. End of section. To Colonel W. F. Morse, version 2. From The Works of Oscar Wilde, volume 15. American Lectures by W. F. Morse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. During the first visit to America, I copyrighted under my name Mr. Wilde's play Vera the Nihilist, and 50 copies were printed for private use. I suggested this course to Mr. Wilde, and received from him the following letter, written at the time Mr. Wilde was lecturing in Boston, and bearing the date January 31st, 1882. Thank you for sending the play to Washington. I think to copyright under your name would be a very good plan. I wish you would send one to the manager you spoke of here, Mr. Field. Also one to Rose Coghlan at Wallack's, and one to Wallack himself. Also one to Mr. Henderson. I think he might try it. I wish you would tell Hayman Haynes that I accept his offer for next October, 1883. That will be exactly good and convenient. End of section. To Samuel Ward, October 1882. From the Catalogue of the Glinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 120. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Uncle Sam. Sam Ward, the bon vivant, brother of Julia Ward Howe. 4 pages, octavo, but written crosswise, making a large 2-page letter, on private paper. Boston, October 1882. My dear Uncle Sam, thank you so much for the review. It is very nicely done, and though literary discourtesy could go further than to omit all mention of my name, still it is so marked as to be almost a compliment. I am surprised that Dana could have done such an ungracious and foolish act. I am off to Nova Scotia, and will be back in 3 weeks. Your idea of a dinner to Mrs. Langtry is charming, but then everything you do, from poetry to menus, is perfect. You are the great authority on lyrics and Lafitte. Ever affectionately, Oscar. Very interesting letter, written shortly before his Halifax lecture. Mr. Ward had greeted Wilde's arrival in New York with a poem, and had entertained him both there and during the summer at Long Beach, and at his sister's cottage, Lawton's Valley, Newport. The review in question was one of Rose Leaf and Apple Leaf in the New York Sun. End of section. To Marie Prescott. From the New York Herald, 12th of August, 1883. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Vera, the first new play to be produced. Active preparations are going on at the Union Square Theatre for the production of Mr. Oscar Wilde's play, Vera, which will be produced to the American public on Monday, the 20th instant. Miss Marie Prescott will play the heroine. The preliminary rehearsals will commence this week, and will be conducted later under the supervision of Mr. Oscar Wilde himself. In a recent letter from Mr. Oscar Wilde to Miss Marie Prescott, he indulges in the following language regarding his play. I have received the American papers, and thank you for sending them. I think we must remember that no amount of advertising will make a bad play succeed, if it is not a good play well acted. I mean that one might patrol the streets of New York with a procession of vermilion caravans twice a day for 6 months, to announce that Vera was a great play, but if on the first night of its production the play was not a strong play, well acted, well mounted, all the advertisements in the world would avail nothing. My name signed to a play will excite some interest in London and America, Your name as the heroine carries great weight with it. What we want to do is to have all the real conditions of success in our hands. Success is a science. If you have the conditions, you get the result. Art is the mathematical result of the emotional desire for beauty. If it is not thought out, it is nothing. As regards dialogue, you can produce tragic effects by introducing comedy. A laugh in an audience does not destroy terror, but, by relieving it, it aids it. Never be afraid that by raising a laugh you destroy tragedy. On the contrary, you intensify it. The canons of each art depend on what they appeal to. Painting appeals to the eye and is founded on the science of acoustics. The drama appeals to human nature and must have as its ultimate basis the science of psychology and physiology. Now, one of the facts of physiology is the desire of any very intensified emotion to be relieved by some emotion that is its opposite. Nature's example of dramatic effect is the laughter of hysteria or the tears of joy. So I cannot cut out my comedy lines. Besides, the essence of good dialogue is interruption. All good dialogue should give the effect of its being made by the reaction of the personages on one another. It should never seem to be ready-made by the author, and interruptions have not merely their artistic effect, but their physical value. They give the actor time to breathe and get new breath power. End of section. To Mrs. Moore, from the Catalogue of the Delau Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 43. A portion of a letter addressed from Paris, Hôtel Voltaire, to Dear Mrs. Moore, thanking her for an invitation to Rome, but saying that he's deep in literary work and cannot leave Paris until he has finished 2 plays, Salome and Ernest. This sounds ambitious, but we live in an age of inordinate personal ambition, and I am determined that the world shall understand me, so I will now, along with my art work, devote to the drama a great deal of my time. The drama seems to me to be the meeting place of art and life. Here the letter ends. 18 lines. £4 10s. End of section. To Robert Sherard, from Oscar Wilde, The Story of an Unhappy Friendship, by Robert Sherard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dear Robert, your letters are charming. They are iridescent, and everything you see or hear seems to become touched with colour and tinged with joy. I think of you often wandering in violet valleys with your honey-coloured hair, and meditating on the influences of paradoxes on the pastoral mind. But you should be here. One can only write in cities, the country hanging on one's walls, in the grey mists of Corot, or the opal mornings that D'Aubigny has given us. Not that I have written here. The splendid whirl and swirl of life in London sweeps me from my sphinx. I am hard at work being idle. Late midnights and famishing morrows follow one another. I wish I was back in Paris, where I did such good work. However, society must be amazed, and my Neronian coiffure has amazed it. Nobody recognizes me, and everybody tells me I look young. That is delightful, of course. My book you will have next week. It is a great pleasure to give it to anyone so sympathetic as you, poet to poet. I give you my work because your joy in it makes it more dear to me. Who is your young man who likes what I said of the primrose? My pen is horrid, my ink bad, my temper worse. Write soon, and come soon to London. Oscar. End of section. To Marie Prescott. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Charles Street, Grosvenor Square. My dear Miss Prescott, it is with great pride and pleasure that I look forward to seeing you in the character of the heroine of my play, a character which I entrust to you with the most absolute confidence, for the first night I saw you act, I recognized in you a great artist. I do not mean only that there was strength and splendor in your acting, music and melody in your voice, and in every pose and gesture as you walked the stage the infinite grace of perfect expressiveness, but that behind all these things, which are merely the technique of acting, there lay the true artistic nature which alone can conceive a part, and the true artistic power which alone can create one. As regards the play itself, I have tried in it to express, within the limits of art, that Titan cry of the peoples for liberty, which in Europe of our day is threatening thrones and making governments unstable from Spain to Russia, and from north to southern seas. But it is not a play of politics, but of passion. It deals with no theories of government, but with men and women simply. And modern nihilistic Russia, with all the terror of its tyranny and the marvel of its martyrdoms, is merely the fiery and fervent background in front of which the persons of my dream live and love. With this feeling was the play written, and with this aim should the play be acted. I have to thank you for the list of your company which you've sent me, and congratulate you, as well as myself, on the names of the many well-known and tried actors which I see it includes. I am very much pleased to know that my directions as regards scenery and costume have been carried out. The yellow satin council chamber is sure to be a most artistic scene, and as you have been unable to match in New York the vermilion silk of which I sent you a pattern, I hope you will allow me to bring you over a piece large enough for your dress in the last act. I look forward with much interest to a second visit to America, and to having the privilege of presenting to the American people my first drama. There is, I think, no country in the world where there are such appreciative theatrical audiences as I saw in the United States. I hope that by the time I arrive the play will be in good rehearsing order, and I remain, dear Miss Prescott, your sincere friend and admirer. Oscar Wilde. End of section. Constance Lloyd to Oscar Wilde, 11th of November 1883. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 414. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. First portion of an autograph letter, 4 pages, duodecimo. Dublin, November 11th, 1883. Written before their engagement. Dear Mr. Wilde, you ask me to let you know what I think of your play, and though I have no pretensions to being a critic, and do not even know what constitutes a good play, I must, I suppose, give you some answer. I was much interested in Vera. I cannot understand why you should have been so unfortunate in its reception, unless either the acting was very inferior, or the audience was unsympathetic. I'm afraid you and I disagree in our opinions on art, for I hold that there is no perfect art without perfect morality, whilst you say they are distinct and separable things. And of course you have your knowledge to combat my ignorance with, etc. End of section. Exchange with J. M. Whistler. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. World. Volume 19, number 489, November 14th, 1883, page 16, 500. Telegram to Whistler. Reprinted in Miscellanies, 1908, page 133. A supposititious conversation in last week's Punch has brought about the following interchange of telegrams. From Oscar Wilde, Exeter, to J. McNeill Whistler, Tite Street. Punch too ridiculous. When you and I are together, we never talk about anything except ourselves. From Whistler, Tite Street, to Oscar Wilde, Exeter. No, no, Oscar, you forget. When you and I are together, we never talk about anything except me. End of section. Constance Lloyd to Oscar Wilde. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 415. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. First portion of an autograph letter, written to Oscar Wilde before their marriage. 4 pages, octavo. 100 Lancaster Gate, Sunday night. My darling love, I am sorry I was so silly. You take all my strength away. I have no power to do anything but just love you when you're with me. Do believe that I love you most passionately with all the strength of my heart and mind. I am content to let the past be buried. It does not belong to me. For the future, trust and faith will come, and when I have you for my husband, I will hold you fast with chains of love and devotion, so that you shall never leave me, or love anyone as long as I can love and comfort. Lot 416. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. Latter portion of an autograph letter signed, written to Oscar Wilde before their marriage. Signed, Constance. Still a week before I can begin to think about your coming back. How the days crawl! Next week will be doleful and dreary in that huge house at Lancaster Gate, where the rooms seem peopled with dreams and shadows, etc. Lot 417. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. Autograph letter signed. 7 pages. 100 Lancaster Gate. Wednesday morning, no date. Signed, Constance. Written to Oscar Wilde before their marriage. My darling Oscar, such a lovely lily has just come from you, and I'm so happy over it. How very sweet of you to send it. It is like a flower from paradise bringing memories of heaven, and all lovely things. You must not give up any more Saturday lectures, and if you won't promise to have a proper supper, you are not to come see me on Saturday evening. I am still very angry with you for not telling me you were starving last Saturday. I am afraid you will have to go to Mr. Whistler's without me. Please don't let him be offended or think I did not want to come. I have nothing to write except that I love you. You must read my heart and not any outward semblance if you wish to know how passionately I worship and love you, etc. Lot 418. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. Latter portion of an autograph letter signed, written to Oscar Wilde before their marriage. 5 pages, duodecimo, signed Constance. I don't miss you the least bit in the world, darling, and am quite happy. I know this will please you. Only I wish you would not take all my sleep away with you. You might leave me a scrap. I tossed about last night trying to catch any stray fragment that you might have left, but not to much purpose, etc. Lot 419. Wilde, Constance Lloyd. First portion of an autograph letter written to Oscar Wilde before their marriage. 4 pages, 12mo, 1 Ely Place, Dublin, Thursday, 8:30 p.m. My own darling Oscar, I have just got your letter, and your letters always make me mad for joy, and yet more mad to see you and feel once again that you are mine, and that it is not a dream but a living reality that you love me. If you had your magic crystal, you would see nothing, believe me, but your own dear image there forever, and in my eyes you shall see reflected naught but my love for you, etc. End of section. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 14th of October, 1884. From Miscellanies by Oscar Wilde. Woman's Dress. Pall Mall Gazette, October 14th, 1884. Mr. Oscar Wilde, who asks us to permit him that most charming of all pleasures, the pleasure of answering one's critics, sends us the following remarks. The girl graduate must, of course, have precedence, not merely for her sex, but for her sanity. Her letter is extremely sensible. She makes 2 points: that high heels are a necessity for any lady who wishes to keep her dress clean from the Stygian mud of our streets, and that without a tight corset, the ordinary number of petticoats and etceteras cannot be properly or conveniently held up. Now it is quite true that as long as the lower garments are suspended from the hips, a corset is an absolute necessity. The mistake lies in not suspending all apparel from the shoulders. In the latter case, a corset becomes useless. The body is left free and unconfined for respiration and motion. There is more health, and consequently more beauty. Indeed, all the most ungainly and uncomfortable articles of dress that fashion has ever in her folly prescribed, not the tight corset merely, but the farthingale, the virtue gaydin, the hoop, the crinoline, and that modern monstrosity, the so-called dress improver also, all of them have owed their origin to the same error, the error of not seeing that it is from the shoulders, and from the shoulders only, that all garments should be hung. And as regards high heels, I quite admit that some additional height to the shoe or boot is necessary if long gowns are to be worn in the street, but what I object to is that the height should be given to the heel only, and not to the sole of the foot also. The modern high-heeled boot is, in fact, merely the clog of the time of Henry VI, with the front prop left out, and its inevitable effect is to throw the body forward, to shorten the steps, and, consequently, to produce that want of grace which always follows want of freedom. Why should clogs be despised? Much art has been expended on clogs. They have been made of lovely woods, and delicately inlaid with ivory and with mother-of-pearl. A clog might be a dream of beauty, and, if not too high or too heavy, most comfortable also. But if there be any who do not like clogs, let them try some adaptation of the trouser of the Turkish lady, which is loose round the limb and tight at the ankle. The girl graduate with a pathos to which I am not insensible, entreats me to apotheosize that awful befringed, beflounced, and bekilted divided skirt. Well, I will acknowledge that the fringes, the flounces, and the kilting do certainly defeat the whole object of the dress, which is that of ease and liberty, but I regard these things as mere wicked superfluities, tragic proofs that the divided skirt is ashamed of its own division. The principle of the dress is good, and, though it is not by any means perfection, it is a step towards it. Here I leave the girl graduate, with much regret, for Mr. Wentworth Huysch. Mr. Huysch makes the old criticism that Greek dress is unsuited to our climate, and to me the somewhat new assertion that the men's dress of 100 years ago was preferable to that of the second part of the 17th century, which I consider to have been the exquisite period of English costume. Now, as regards the first of these two statements, I will say, to begin with, that the warmth of apparel does not depend really on the number of garments worn, but on the material of which they are made. One of the chief faults of modern dress is that it is composed of far too many articles of clothing, most of which are of the wrong substance. But over a substratum of pure wool, such as is supplied by Dr. Jäger under the modern German system, some modification of Greek costume is perfectly applicable to our climate, our country, and our century. This important fact has already been pointed out by Mr. E. W. Godwin in his excellent, though too brief, Handbook on Dress, contributed to the Health Exhibition. I call it an important fact because it makes almost any form of lovely costume perfectly practicable in our cold climate. Mr. Godwin, it is true, points out that the English ladies of the 13th century abandoned after some time the flowing garments of the early Renaissance in favour of a tighter mode, such as northern Europe seems to demand. This I quite admit, and its significance. But what I contend, and what I am sure Mr. Godwin would agree with me in, is that the principles, the laws of Greek dress may be perfectly realized, even in a moderately tight gown with sleeves. I mean the principle of suspending all apparel from the shoulders, and of relying for beauty of effect not on the stiff ready-made ornaments of the modern milliner, the bows where there should be no bows, and the flounces where there should be no flounces, but on the exquisite play of light and line that one gets from rich and rippling folds. I am not proposing any antiquarian revival of an ancient costume, but trying merely to point out the right laws of dress, laws which are dictated by art and not by archaeology, by science and not by fashion. And just as the best work of art in our days is that which combines classic grace with absolute reality, so from a continuation of the Greek principles of beauty with the German principles of health will come, I feel certain, the costume of the future. And now to the question of men's dress, or rather to Mr. Huysch's claim of the superiority, in point of costume, of the last quarter of the 18th century over the second quarter of the 17th. The broad-brimmed hat of 1640 kept the rain of winter and the glare of summer from the face. The same cannot be said of the hat of 100 years ago, which, with its comparatively narrow brim and high crown, was the precursor of the modern chimney-pot. A wide, turned-down collar is a healthier thing than a strangling stock, and a short cloak much more comfortable than a sleeved overcoat, even though the latter may have had 3 capes. A cloak is easier to pat on and off, lies lightly on the shoulder in summer, and wrapped round one in winter keeps one perfectly warm. A doublet, again, is simpler than a coat and waistcoat. Instead of 2 garments, one has 1. By not being open, also, it protects the chest better. Short, loose trousers are in every way to be preferred to the tight knee breeches, which often impede the proper circulation of the blood. And, finally, the soft leather boots, which could be worn above or below the knee, are more supple, and give consequently more freedom than the stiff Hessian, which Mr. Huysch so praises. I say nothing about the question of grace and picturesqueness, for I suppose that no one, not even Mr. Huysch, would prefer a macaroni to a cavalier, a Lawrence to a Van Dyck, or the 3rd George to the 1st Charles. But for ease, warmth, and comfort, this 17th century dress is infinitely superior to anything that came after it, and I do not think it is excelled by any preceding form of costume. I sincerely trust that we may soon see in England some national revival of it. End of section. Exchange with J. M. Whistler, 24th of February, 1885. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. World, Volume 22, Number 556, February 25th, 1885, page 14, 214. Tenderness in Tite Street. Reprinted in Miscellanies, 1908, page 133. Tenderness in Tite Street. Oscar, I have read your exquisite article in the Pall Mall. Nothing is more delicate in the flattery of the poet to the painter than the naivete of the poet in the choice of his painters. Benjamin West and Paul Delaroche. You have pointed out that the painter's mission is to find le beau dans l'horrible, and have left to the poet the discovery of le horrible dans le beau. Signed with butterfly design. Saturday, February 21st. Here is Oscar's reply. Dear Butterfly, by the aid of a biographical dictionary, I made the discovery that there were once 2 painters called Benjamin West and Paul Delaroche, who rashly lectured upon art. As of their works nothing at all remains, I conclude that they explained themselves away. Be warned in time, James, and remain, as I do, incomprehensible. To be great is to be misunderstood. To vous, Oscar. End of section. To Mr. Appleton. From The Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 281. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed. 3 pages, 8vo. 16 Tite Street. To Mr. Appleton. The lecture cannot be on Cellini. It is on dress. I hope there is no mal in the matter. Etc. End of section. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 30th of March, 1885. From Reviews by Oscar Wilde. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Parnassus versus Philology. Pall Mall Gazette, April 1st, 1885. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, I am deeply distressed to hear that tuberose is so called from its being a lumpy flower. It is not at all lumpy, and even if it were, no poet should be heartless enough to say so. Henceforth there really must be two derivations for every word, one for the poet and one for the scientist. And in the present case, the poet will dwell on the tiny trumpets of ivory into which the white flower breaks, and leave to the man of science horrid allusions to its supposed lumpiness and indiscreet revelations of its private life below ground. In fact, tuba as a derivation is disgraceful. On the roots of verbs philology may be allowed to speak, but on the roots of flowers she must keep silence. We cannot allow her to dig up Parnassus. And as regards the word being a trisyllable, I am reminded by a great living poet that another correctly wrote, "And the jessamine faint, and the sweet tuberose, the sweetest flower for scent that blows, and all rare blossoms from every clime, grew in that garden in perfect prime." In justice to Shelley, whose lines I quote, your readers will admit that I have good authority for making a dissyllable of tuberose. I am, sir, your obedient servant. The Critic, who had to read 4 volumes of modern poetry. March 30th. End of section. To Edwin Palmer, from The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The following letter to Edwin Palmer, the editor, refers to Wilde's earliest contributions to the Dramatic Review. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea. Dear Sir, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your cheque for £2 2 for my article on Shakespeare. If you would like a poem, I will send you one, but I would ask you not to include any other poem in the number in which it appears, particularly no parody of any sort. Parodies are a legitimate form of art, and those in your paper I think exceedingly clever. But the art that appeals to laughter and the art that appeals to beauty are different. Also, a poem should be printed across a page. There should be no column line. So you see, there are difficulties. Write to me how you propose to print it. The poem is in 12 stanzas of 3 lines each. It is called The Harlot's House. Yours truly, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To an unidentified correspondent. From 20 Years in Paris, by Robert Sherard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. He took pleasure in counselling young writers. The following is one of the many letters which he wrote, an answer to a youth who had written to him, sending him a manuscript to read, and asking him for guidance to literary success. The letter was dated from Tite Street. Dear blank, I have been laid up with a severe attack of asthma, and have been unable to answer your letter before this. I return you your manuscript as you desire, and would advise you to prune it down a little, and send it to either Time or Longmans. It is better than many magazine articles, though, if you will allow me to say so, it is rather belligerent in tone. As regards your prospects in literature, believe me that it is impossible to live by literature. By journalism a man may make an income, but rarely by pure literary work. I would strongly advise you to try and make some profession, such as that of a tutor, the basis and mainstay of your life, and to keep literature for your finest, rarest moments. The best work in literature is always done by those who do not depend upon it for their daily bread, and the highest form of literature, poetry, brings no wealth to the singer. For producing your best work, also you will require some leisure and freedom from sordid care. It is always a difficult thing to give advice, but as you are younger than I am, I venture to do so. Make some sacrifice for your art, and you will be repaid. But ask of art to sacrifice herself for you, and a bitter disappointment may come to you. I hope it will not, but there is always a terrible chance. With your education, you should have no difficulty in getting some post which should enable you to live without anxiety, and to keep for literature your most felicitous moods. To attain this end, you should be ready to give up some of your natural pride. But, loving literature as you do, I cannot think that you would not do so. Finally, remember that London is full of young men working for literary success, and that you must carve your way to fame. Laurels don't come for the asking. Yours, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 15th of January, 1886. From Reviews by Oscar Wilde. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Half Hours with the Worst Authors. Pall Mall Gazette, January 15th, 1886. I am very much pleased to see that you are beginning to call attention to the extremely slipshod and careless style of our ordinary magazine writers. Will you allow me to refer your readers to an article on Borrow in the current number of Macmillan, which exemplifies very clearly the truth of your remarks? The author of the article is Mr. George Saintsbury, a gentleman who has recently written a book on prose style, and here are some specimens of the prose of the future according to the Système Saintsbury. 1. He saw the rise and, in some instances, the death of Tennyson, Thackeray, Macaulay, Carlyle, Dickens. 2. See a place which Kingsley, or Mr. Ruskin, or some other master of our decorative school have described, much more one which has fallen into the hands of the small fry of their imitators, and you are almost sure to find that it has been overdone. 3. The great mass of his translations, published and unpublished, and the smaller mass of his early hack work, no doubt deserves judicious excerption. 4. The Romany Rye did not appear for 6 years, that is to say, in 1857. 5. The elaborate apparatus which most prose tellers of fantastic tales use, and generally fail in using. 6. The great writers, whether they try to be like other people, or try not to be like them, and sometimes in the first case most of all, succeed only in being themselves. 7. If he had a slight overdose of Celtic blood and Celtic peculiarity, it was more than made up by the readiness of literary expression which it gave him. He, if anyone, bore an English heart, though, as there often has been, there was something perhaps more than English, as well as less than it, in his fashion of expression. 8. His flashes of ethical reflection, which, though like all ethical reflections, often one-sided. 9. He certainly was an unfriend to Whiggery. 10. That it contains a great deal of quaint and piquant writing is only to say that its writer wrote it. 11. Wild Wales, too, because of its easy and direct opportunity of comparing its description with the originals. 12. The Capitol and full-length portraits. 13. whose attraction is one neither mainly, nor in any very great degree, one of pure form. 14. Constantly right in general. These are merely a few examples of the style of Mr. Saintsbury, a writer who seems quite ignorant of the commonest laws both of grammar and of literary expression, who has apparently no idea of the difference between the pronouns this and that, and has as little hesitation in ending the clause of a sentence with a preposition as he has in inserting a parenthesis between a preposition and its object, a mistake of which the most ordinary schoolboy would be ashamed. And why cannot our magazine writers use plain, simple English? "Unfriend," quoted above, is a quite unnecessary archaism, and so is such a phrase as, "With this Borrow could not away," in the sense of, "This Borrow could not endure." Borrow's abstraction from general society may, I suppose, pass muster. Pope talks somewhere of a hermit's abstraction, but what is the meaning of saying that the author of Lavengro quartered Castile and Leon in the most interesting manner, riding everywhere with his servant? And what defence can be made for such an expression as Scott and other black beasts of Borrow's? Black beast for bête noire is really abominable. The object of my letter, however, is not to point out the deficiencies of Mr. Saintsbury's style, but to express my surprise that his article should have been admitted into the pages of a magazine like Macmillan's. Surely it does not require much experience to know that such an article is a disgrace even to magazine literature. End of section. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 8th of February 1886. From the Pall Mall Gazette. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To read or not to read? As we have published so many letters advising what to read, the following advice, what not to read, from so good an authority as Mr. Oscar Wilde, may be of service. Books, I fancy, may be conveniently divided into three classes. 1. Books to read, such as Cicero's Letters, Suetonius, Vasari's Lives of the Painters, the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Sir John Mandeville, Marco Polo, St. Simon's Memoirs, Mommsen, and, till we get a better one, Grote's History of Greece. 2. Books to reread, such as Plato and Keats. In the sphere of poetry, the masters, not the minstrels. In the sphere of philosophy, the seers, not the savants. 3. Books not to read at all, such as Thomson's Seasons, Roger's Italy, Paley's Evidences, all the Fathers except St. Augustine, all John Stuart Mill except the Essay on Liberty, all Voltaire's plays without any exception, Butler's Analogy, Grant's Aristotle, Hume's England, Lewes' History of Philosophy, all argumentative books, and all books that try to prove anything. This third class is by far the most important. To tell people what to read is as a rule either useless or harmful, for the true appreciation of literature is a question of temperament, not of teaching. To Parnassus there is no primer, and nothing that one can learn is ever worth learning. But to tell people what not to read is a very different matter, and I venture to recommend it as a mission of the University Extension Scheme. Indeed, it is one that is eminently needed in this age of ours, an age which reads so much that it has no time to admire, and writes so much that it has no time to think. Whoever will select out of the chaos of our modern curricula the worst 100 books, and publish a list of them, will confer on the rising generation a real and lasting benefit. After expressing these views, I suppose that I should not offer any suggestions at all with regard to the best 100 books, but I hope that you will allow me the pleasure of being inconsistent, as I am anxious to put in a claim for the book that has been strangely omitted by most of the excellent judges who have contributed to your columns. I mean the Greek anthology. The beautiful poems contained in this collection seem to me to hold the same position with regard to Greek dramatic literature as do the delicate little figurines of Tanagra to the Phidian marbles, and to be quite as necessary for the complete understanding of the Greek spirit. I am also amazed to find that Edgar Allan Poe has been passed over. Surely this marvellous lord of rhythmic expression deserves a place. If, in order to make room for him, it be necessary to elbow out someone else, I should elbow out Southey, and I think that Baudelaire might be most advantageously substituted for Keble. No doubt, both in The Curse of Kehama and in The Christian Year, there are poetical qualities of a certain kind, but absolute catholicity of taste is not without its dangers. It is only an auctioneer who should admire all schools of art. End of section. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 5th of November, 1886. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Pall Mall Gazette, Volume 14, Number 6753, November 6, 1886, page 6. Mr. Swinburne and the Quarterly Review. Not reprinted. It has not been possible definitely to establish that this letter is by Wilde, but there seems to be every probability that it is. Wilde contributed to the Pall Mall Gazette, under the pseudonym of Oxoniensis, Half Hours with the Worst Authors on January 15, 1886. The article in the Quarterly Review for October 1886, volume 163, number 326, pages 289 to 329, was attributed to the late John Churton Collins, who in 1894 became Professor of English Literature at Birmingham University. It was entitled Literature at Our Universities, and attacked From Shakespeare to Pope, an inquiry into the causes and phenomena of the rise of classical poetry in England, by Edmund Gosse, Clark Lecturer on English Literature at the University of Cambridge. Mr. Gosse replied in the Athenaeum, October 30th, pages 534 to 535, and the Quarterly Reviewer in the following issue, pages 570 to 571. Mr. Swinburne and the Quarterly Review. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, will you allow me to make one or two observations on the few statements of fact which it is here and there possible to discern through the storm of expletives and superlatives that bursts from Mr. Swinburne's pen in tonight's Athenaeum? The object of his letter is to discredit the Quarterly Reviewer, whose article on English literature has attracted so much attention. This is how he does it. 1. He asserts that in the said article, Sophocles figures as the author of the Agamemnon and the Persae. Mr. Swinburne invites his readers to consult the passage referred to. I have done so, and this is what I find. The reviewer suggests that it would be profitable to compare the tragedies of Shakespeare with The tragedies of the Attic stage. In illustration of this general statement, he says, first, that it would be well to compare them with Sophocles, and, secondly, some dozen lines lower down, that it would be well to compare Macbeth with the Agamemnon, and Henry V with the Persae. This is what Mr. Swinburne calls Sophocles figuring as the author of the Agamemnon and the Persae. Why is he not consistent? Lower down still, the reviewer, still in support of his main contention, the necessity, namely, of comparing English literature with Greek and Roman, cites the Ethics. Why does not Mr. Swinburne go the whole hog while he is about it, and say, in that pleasant manner of his, that the reviewer has made an indecent exposure by talking of Sophocles as the author of the Ethics? It is only fair, however, to Mr. Swinburne to add that further on he confesses that he does not believe in the charge. May one then ask why he made it? 2. Secondly, Mr. Swinburne discovers in the Quarterly Reviewer's article 3 very small grammatical inaccuracies. The importance which Mr. Swinburne attaches to them requires a word of explanation. The reviewer, it will be remembered, incidentally characterized Mr. Swinburne's prose style as intolerably involved, florid, and diffuse. And to do that, a man must claim, it seems to Mr. Swinburne, to be no mean and no common authority. Therein Mr. Swinburne is surely mistaken, but I will take the matter at his own valuation. His weapon is at best somewhat of the boomerang order, as the following parallel passages will perhaps show. Quarterly Reviewer. It is as easy to invest a worthless book with those superficial attractions which catch the eye of the crowd, as it is a meritorious one. Page 293. Elliptical. Understand, as it is to invest, a meritorious one. It would be difficult to mention a single theory on the principles of composition, a single important critical canon, which are not to be traced originally to the ancient critics. Page 320. Plural verb with singular substantives, error. It would be seen with what exactness each of these students of human nature has arrived independently at the same truths, and corroborate each other. Page 323. A somewhat bold constructio ad sensum, understand, and how they corroborate each other. Mr. Swinburne. Even in Charlotte Bronte's highest work I find no touches of such exquisite strength and triumphant simplicity as here. Study on Charlotte Bronte, page 71. Elliptical, understand as I find here. Her love of death for earth's sake, her tender loyalty and passionate reverence for the All-Mother, bring to mind the words of her sister's friend. Idem 75. Plural verb with singular substantives, error. Were there but one grain of external evidence, though light as that which now inclines the scale of probabilities in favour of Chapman, I should not hesitate in assigning to it the workmanship of this poem also. Essay on Chapman, page 36. An excessively bold constructio ad sensum, it refers not to one grain, which would make nonsense, but to a substantive in some preceding sentence. Look for it till you find it. The above-mentioned lapses do not seem to me very important, but Mr. Swinburne insists that the man who makes them must be off to Dotheboys Hall. I do not envy Mr. Squeers his new pupil. 3. The Quarterly Reviewer says that A large portion of what is valuable in our poetry is as historically unintelligible, apart from the Greek and Roman classics, as the epic and lyric poetry of Rome would be, apart from the epic and lyric poetry of Greece. This statement Mr. Swinburne dismisses as a crowning absurdity, a culminating offence, etc., 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 to contradict which would be a preposterous act of condescension. On such terms, rational discussion is not, it must be confessed, very easy, unless, indeed, Mr. Swinburne will so far condescend as to explain how, apart from the ancient Greeks, it is possible to make historically intelligible such works as the Samson Agonistes, or his own Atalanta and Erechtheus. 4. Fourthly, Mr. Swinburne, like all of Mr. Goss's friends, confesses that he has not read through the book in question. 5. But, lastly, what he does know is that the Quarterly Review, which now attacks the said book, formerly attacked Keats. That, sir, is the sum and substance, the storm wind alone excluded, of all that Mr. Swinburne is able to scour together against the quarterly article. That he was anxious to find as much as possible is proved by the strength of his language. That he has succeeded in finding so little is conclusive evidence of the weakness of his case. Nor does the veiled compliment to the Quarterly Reviewer stop there. Not only has Mr. Swinburne so very little to say against him, but much even of what he does say is not original. I subjoin side by side some of Mr. Swinburne's remarks and some of an earlier contributor's to the discussion. Mr. Buchanan, October 20th. Pall Mall Gazette, October 21st, page 6. When the leader of the attack is the poor, purblind, pedagogic Quarterly Reviewer, who has about as much critical insight as Mr. Wackford Squeers, and has from time immemorial conducted the Dotheboys Hall of Albemarle Street on principles of corporal punishment and intellectual starvation, my sympathy turns, as now, to amused indignation. I have not even read the article in question. Whatever may be the judgment of the Quarterly Review, it comes from a quarter which has always hated and reviled true literature, from persons who have slavered the hands and licked the feet of bogus authors recruited from the coroneted classes, from men who have never, to my knowledge, said a kind or a liberal word since the day when they tried to kill John Keats, until the day when they threw mud at the fair fame of Alfred Tennyson. Mr. Swinburne, November 1st. Athenaeum, November 6th, page 600. No less must have been the astonishment of all men with any tinge of culture, or any knowledge of letters, to see any serious attention accorded by any literary student to an article on any question of literature which might arise from the office of the Quarterly Review. Another instance of grammar which may serve to illustrate this critic's reference to the average scholarship at Dotheboys Hall. I never heard of it till now. In particular criticisms, if not in general propositions, the fatuity of his precursors was often unsurpassable. A generation later, while commending the poetical promise of Mr. Monckton Milnes, they foretold for him a day when he would look back from his seat on Parnassus with equal amusement and regret upon the foolish young days in which he had burned incense before such baby idols as Mr. John Keats and Mr. Alfred Tennyson. Truly the thunders of the Quarterly Review would seem to be like adversity. They make strange bedfellows. Mr. Swinburne, as we all know, has at other times paid Mr. Buchanan the compliment of immoderate abuse. But never before, I imagine, has he rendered in that quarter the last flattery of all, the flattery of imitation. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Oxoniensis. November 5th. End of section. Exchange with J. M. Whistler, November 1886. From The Real Oscar Wilde by Robert Sherard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. What has Oscar in common with art? Asks Whistler in a letter addressed to the world for 17th November 1886. Except that he dines at our tables and picks from our platters the plums for the pudding he peddles in the provinces. Oscar, the amiable, irresponsible, esurient Oscar, with no more sense of a picture than of the fit of a coat, has the courage of the opinions of others. It may be remembered that to this Oscar replied in the following note, which appeared in the World for November 1886. From Oscar. Atlas, this is very sad. With our James, vulgarity begins at home, and should be allowed to stay there. A vous, Oscar. This provoked from the spiteful James the following. To whom? A poor thing, Oscar, but, for once, I suppose, your own. End of section. To John Broderick. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 283. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, duodecimo, 16 Tite Street. To John Broderick. I have been asked by Cassell's to edit one of their monthly magazines for them, and am anxious to make it the organ for women of culture and position. Mrs. June, Miss Thackeray, Mrs. Fawcett, Lady Archibald Campbell, Lady Pollock, Lady Dorothy Neville, and many others have promised to write for it, and I should like to number your sister amongst my contributors, etc. End of section. To Edward Heron Allen, 17th of October, 1887. From the Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The following letter was written by Wilde to Mr. Edward Heron Allen, the author of various works on chiromancy. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, S.W., October 17th, 1887. My dear Heron Allen, we are all charmed at your success, but of course we want you at home. When do you come back? My wife tells me that she has sent you a copy of Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. I was going to send it to McClure, the newspaper syndicate man in Philadelphia, as I want to have it published in the States. If you can sell it for me to any enterprising editor, pray do so, and you can write a short preface on the chiromancy of the story. I think I should get between $50 and $100 for it. Try McClure. He commands about 50 papers. I was at Malloy's the other night. It was very pleasant, and Bernard Partridge was charming. He talked about you a great deal. Believe me, very truly yours, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To Mrs. Bernard Beer, circa January 1889. From the Catalogue of the Gleinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A charming, whimsical letter. Lot 127. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Burney, Mrs. Bernard Beer, who created the role of Mrs. Arbuthnot in A Woman of No Importance. 8 pages, quarto, on the stationery of the Beaufort Club, 32 Dover Street, W. Somewhat soiled. Circa January 1889. My dear Burney, you will be sorry to hear that I have been in great trouble. Our youngest boy has been so ill that we thought he could never recover, and I was so unhappy over it that all my duties and letters escaped me. I am afraid, as it is 10 years since I lived in Dublin, that all my friends have vanished. But I have no doubt that by this time all the college boys are in love with you. If they are not, they must have lost their old admiration for wit and beauty. I hope you will drive about on outside cars. There are several Dion Boucicaults on the stand opposite the Shelbourne who are delightful creatures. How nice of the earthquake to wait till you had left. Après vous, le tremblement de terre. Your last dinner was a marvel. We have no Lyon now, but Ouida. With best wishes, believe me ever yours, Oscar. Fascinating intimate letter, very characteristic of Wilde. His younger boy was Vivian, who a few years ago was a student at Cambridge. Letters of this period are extremely scarce. End of section. To Mrs. Hamilton King, 31st of October 1887. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 363. Autograph letter signed, 2 pages, octavo, London, October 31st, 1887, to Mrs. Hamilton King, written while he was engaged as editor of The Woman's World. I am very much pleased at the prospect of publishing some of your work in my magazine. End of section. To Thomas Hutchinson, 30th of July, 1888. From the Catalogue of the Glinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. An extraordinary letter containing Wilde's opinion of his Nightingale and the Rose. Lot 124. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Thomas Hutchinson, 4 pages, quarto, on the stationery of his home, 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, S.W. Signed in full. The date has been entered by Mr. Hutchinson. July 13th, 1888. I am afraid that I don't think as much of the young student as you do. He seems to me a rather shallow young man. The nightingale is the true lover, if there is one. She, at least, is romance, and the student and the girl are, like most of us, unworthy of romance. So, at least, it seems to me, but I like to fancy that there may be many meanings in the tale, for, in writing it, I did not start with an idea and clothe it in form, but began with a form, and strove to make it beautiful enough to have many secrets and many answers. Remarkable literary letter, that takes rank with his poems in prose. End of section. To Leonard Smithers. From The Real Oscar Wilde by Robert Sherard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. My dear Sir, I must very sincerely thank you for your charming letter, and am glad to think that the happy prince has found so sympathetic an admirer, so gracious a lover. The story is an attempt to treat a tragic modern problem in a form that aims at delicacy and imaginative treatment. It is a reaction against the purely imitative character of modern art. And now that literature has taken to blowing loud trumpets, I cannot but be pleased that someone has cared to listen to the low music of a little reed. So I thank you again, and remain faithfully yours, Oscar Wilde. Facsimile of the first letter written by Oscar Wilde to Leonard Smithers, who afterwards became his publisher. End of section. To Alice Corcoran, circa November 1888. From the Catalogue of the Glinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 125. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Alice Corcoran, author. 4 pages, quarto, on stationery of his home, 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, SW. Signed in full. Circa November 1888. The non-appearance of the review makes no matter, and my letter was merely a bit of nonsense. I think I have got quite as much praise as is good for me. America has exhausted itself in complimentary adjectives. I have been reading your charming story, Meg's Friend, and have said a few words about it in my Christmas number. I am hard at work at some new stories which I think you will like. Why don't you send something to the Woman's World? Fine letter, written while he was editor of the Woman's World. His remarks refer to the Happy Prince, of which he had sent Miss Corcoran a presentation copy in June. The new stories were The Young King, etc. End of section. To Walter Hamilton, 29th of January, 1889. From the Catalogue of the Glinzer Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 128. Wilde, Oscar. Autograph letter signed to Walter Hamilton, apropos of his Parodies of the Works of English and American Authors. 4 pages, quarto, on the stationery of his home, 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, SW, with postmarked envelope. Signed in full. January 29th, 1889. I have never collected the parodies of my poetry. Collecting contemporaneous things is like trying to hold froth in a sieve. As most of my poems are long and lyrical, they have not, I fancy, been good models. Parody, which is the muse with her tongue in her cheek, has always amused me, but it requires a light touch, and, oddly enough, a love of the poet whom it caricatures. One's disciples can parody one, nobody else. Extremely brilliant letter, in perfect condition. End of section. To Miss Keneally, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 313. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, octavo. Albemarle Club, no date. To Miss Keneally. I have read your article with great interest, and the passage at the end about the body having its own ideals seems to me most fine and finely said. There is a passage in the 11th chapter of Dorian Gray that I should like you to see. How everything that you say in your clever article makes for the Greek ideal, the only ideal that has its feet in reality, etc. End of section. To Richard Le Gallienne, 16th of April, 1889. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 314. Autograph letter signed. 3 pages, small quarto. 16 Tite Street, April 16th, 1889. To Richard Le Gallienne, with addressed envelope. Thank you so much for the sonnet, which I greatly like. It is very subtle, one of your best things. London, for all its gloom, is not killing, but making the poet. Etc. End of section. To the Editor of Truth, 9th of January, 1890. From Miscellanies by Oscar Wilde. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reply to Whistler. Truth, January 9th, 1890. To the Editor of Truth. Sir, I can hardly imagine that the public is in the very smallest degree interested in the shrill shrieks of plagiarism that proceed from time to time out of the lips of silly vanity or incompetent mediocrity. However, as Mr. James Whistler has had the impertinence to attack me with both venom and vulgarity in your columns, I hope you will allow me to state that the assertions contained in his letter are as deliberately untrue as they are deliberately offensive. The definition of a disciple as one who has the courage of the opinions of his master is really too old even for Mr. Whistler to be allowed to claim it. And as for borrowing Mr. Whistler's ideas about art, the only thoroughly original ideas I have ever heard him express have had reference to his own superiority as a painter over painters greater than himself. It is a trouble for any gentleman to have to notice the lucubrations of so ill-bred and ignorant a person as Mr. Whistler. But your publication of his insolent letter left me no option in the matter. I remain, sir, faithfully yours, Oscar Wilde, 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, S.W. End of section. End of Letters of Oscar Wilde, Volume 1, 1868 to 1890.